He was known as the coldest Mafia CEO in the city, a man people didn't even dare to look in the eye. Power followed him like a shadow, money obeyed him like a slave, and emotions, he buried them long ago. No one had ever seen him smile. No one ever believed he could become a father. He himself laughed at the idea once, years ago, before he stopped believing in anything soft. But life never asks permission before changing everything. She appeared like a mistake in his world, a quiet young woman with tired eyes, carrying secrets she never spoke about. She wasn't supposed to enter his life. She was just a temporary worker in one of his company branches, invisible like dust on glass. But fate had a strange sense of humor. One night, during a chaotic incident involving his enemies, she crossed paths with him in a way that should have ended quickly, but didn't. Instead of fear, she showed something else, calmness, something that irritated him more than defiance ever could. He remembered the moment clearly, the rain, the broken streetlight flickering above, the sound of distant sirens. He had been injured, surrounded, and she had found him in that condition. She should have run. Everyone else did. But she didn't. Woo! She looked at him like he wasn't a monster, just a wounded man, bleeding in the dark. "Can you stand?" she had asked softly. No one asked him that, and that was the first crack in his armor. He told himself it meant nothing. Temporary weakness, nothing more. But weeks later, he saw her again. And again, as if the world kept pulling her into his path. What he didn't know was that she already carried a secret that could destroy him. A child. Not just any child. His child. She never planned to tell him. Not after what she knew about his world. Men like him didn't become fathers. They became dangers. And she feared what he would do more than what he would say. But hiding a child from a man like him was never going to stay hidden forever. It happened the day the little boy, barely able to walk properly, wandered into the wrong corridor of the CEO building. Security froze. Guards panicked. Because the child looked too familiar. Same sharp eyes. Same expressionless calm. Lectureless calm. The Mafia CEO himself stepped out of the elevator at that exact moment, and time stopped. The child didn't cry, didn't fear him. Just tilted his head slightly, studying the man like he was trying to understand something complicated. The CEO's world, built on control and violence, suddenly felt unstable. Because for the first time in his life, something looked back at him like it belonged to him. He walked closer slowly, every instinct screaming that this was impossible. The child didn't move back. Instead, he held up a small toy car and whispered something innocent, and that was when the woman arrived. Her face went pale the moment she saw them together, because she knew it was over. Everything she had hidden was standing in front of him now, breathing, alive, real, alive, real. The Mafia CEO looked at her, not angry yet, not emotional, just silent. That silence was worse than any explosion. "All of something to explain," he said finally. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but no words came out at first. Because how do you tell a man like him that he already became a father without ever knowing? The child suddenly reached toward him again, smiling slightly this time, as if he already accepted him. That small gesture destroyed something inside the man that no war ever could. But instead of softness, his eyes darkened. Because in his world, nothing came without consequences, and a hidden child meant betrayal, or worse, a trap. The woman braced herself for anger, punishment, rejection, anything. But what she didn't expect was that the Mafia CEO didn't move away. He picked the child up, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And in that moment, his entire empire outside meant nothing. Because something far more dangerous had just entered his life, something he could not control, something he might actually care about. He held the child longer than he intended. That alone was already a mistake in his world. A Mafia CEO didn't hold on. He calculated, controlled, released when necessary. But this small boy, quiet, warm, unaware of the storm around him, made something unfamiliar settle in his arms. The child didn't resist, didn't question. Just rested his head against his shoulder like it was the safest place in the world. And that was exactly what made it dangerous. Because safety around him never lasted. The woman stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. She wasn't afraid of him hurting her anymore. She was afraid of what came after he understood the truth completely. Truth. Because once a man like him accepted something as his, he never let it go. And if he decided it was stolen from him, the world paid the price. Outside the glass walls of the CEO tower, the city kept moving like nothing had changed. Cars honked, people rushed, lights flickered in the distance. But inside that room, everything had shifted into silence so heavy it felt like pressure on the skin. Then his voice came, low, controlled, sharp. "Explain." The woman swallowed hard as she finally forced the words out. "He's yours, no emotion." No soft build-up, just the truth dropped like a blade. For a second, nothing happened. Then the CEO slowly looked down at the child again. Same eyes, same faint crease between the brows when he focused. Even the way the child clutched the small toy mirrored something buried deep in his own past. His jaw tightened. "That's impossible," he said flatly. But his grip on the child didn't loosen. That contradiction was what terrified her more than anger, because doubt in him meant investigation, and investigation meant destruction. Within hours, the entire system of his underground network activated. Files were pulled. Background checks were rerun. Surveillance archives opened like bleeding wounds. Every movement she had made in the past years was dragged into the light. She tried to run. She didn't get far. His men found her near the lower parking structure before she even reached the street. Not roughly, not violently, just silently. Like shadows that had always been there, she was brought back up without a single scream. When she was placed in front of him again, the child was asleep in a private room upstairs. Guards were posted everywhere. No one dared breathe too loudly. CEO didn't raise his voice. That was worse. "You lied," he said. Her lips parted, but she couldn't defend it because she had. And his world lies were not forgiven. They were repaid. But then something unexpected happened. A report slid onto his desk. DNA comparison request completed. He stared at it for a long moment before opening it. 99.9% match. The room felt smaller. Even his closest advisor shifted slightly, uncomfortable, waiting for the explosion that never came. Instead, the CEO leaned back slowly in his chair. His expression didn't break, but something behind his eyes changed. Not softness, not acceptance, recognition. As if a locked door inside him had finally been forced open. But before anyone could process it, a warning flashed on the security system. Unauthorized breach detected. Level 3 perimeter, then Level 2, then Level 1. His entire building shifted into lockdown mode within seconds. The woman looked up sharply. She knew that signal. Not his men, not internal staff. Someone else had come, and they were not here to negotiate. The CEO stood immediately, his calmness snapping into something colder. "Unlock the child's room," he ordered. But even as he spoke, another alert appeared. "Internal sabotage detected." Her face went pale. "They found him," she whispered, because she understood what this meant. His enemies, those who had waited years for even a crack in his empire, had finally discovered the existence of an heir. And a mafia heir was not just a child. It was a throne, a weapon, a target, a reason for war. A distant explosion echoed through the lower floors. Then another. Glass somewhere shattered like ice breaking. The CEO didn't move in panic. He moved like someone who had already lived through too many wars to be surprised by them. But this time, something inside him was different, because this wasn't just territory. This was not just power. This was a child sleeping upstairs who had no idea the world was already trying to take him apart. He turned to her, voice dangerously calm. If anything happens to him." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because she already understood everything would burn. And for the first time, she realized she hadn't just hidden a child from a mafia CEO. She had placed a target on the world's most dangerous man and made him care. The building didn't just shake from the explosion. It answered it like a living thing under attack. Red emergency lights flooded the corridors. Steel doors slammed shut one after another. Sirens screamed through the glass towers of the Mafia CEO's empire as if the entire structure had turned into a cage. But inside that chaos, the CEO moved with absolute control. No panic, no hesitation. Only precision. Seal all exits, he ordered into his earpiece. His voice was calm enough to sound like nothing was wrong, yet every guard on the network knew that tone meant someone was about to disappear permanently. No one leaves the building alive unless I approve it. The woman stood frozen near the private corridor, fear tightening her throat. The child was still upstairs in a secured room, but the sound of explosions outside was getting closer. Whoever had attacked wasn't testing them anymore. They were hunting. The target wasn't the CEO. Oh, it was the child. A sudden crash echoed from the east wing. Gunfire followed immediately, sharp, controlled bursts, not street-level thugs, professionals, the kind that knew exactly how to dismantle a guarded empire piece by piece. The CEO didn't even look at the chaos unfolding around him. His eyes were already fixed on one direction. Upstairs. The woman's voice cracked. They're coming for him, aren't they? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone, tapped one command, the entire building's internal lights shifted into tactical mode. Hidden routes highlighted in red. Enemy movement markers appeared across his screen like a living map. Then he finally spoke. Yes, that single word carried something heavier than anger, decision, and something worse, ownership. Upstairs, the child stirred slightly in his sleep as distant vibrations rattled the walls. A small sound. Confused, unaware. One of the guards stood outside his room, gripping his weapon tightly, sweat forming on his brow. Then, the door exploded inward. Two attackers rushed in. The guard didn't even have time to shout before he was pulled down in silence. The kidnappers moved fast. Efficient. One of them reached toward the sleeping child and froze because the CEO was already there. Not walking, not running, not run. Just arriving, like the space itself had shifted to make room for him. The room turned silent. Even the attackers stopped moving for half a second. An instinctive reaction when prey realizes the predator is already inside the cage with them. The CEO stepped over the fallen guard without looking down. His eyes locked onto the man reaching for the child. You chose the wrong building, he said softly. Then everything broke. One attacker raised his weapon. He didn't get the chance to fire. The CEO moved. It wasn't a fight. It was correction. Within seconds, the room was silent again. No shouting. Again. No dramatic struggle. Just bodies collapsing where they stood as if the air itself had rejected them. But through all of it, the child hadn't woken up until a small hand shifted, a quiet yawn, and then, eyes opening slowly, the CEO stopped immediately. For the first time in the entire night, his expression changed not into weakness, not into softness, but into something far more unfamiliar. Awareness. The child blinked at him, confused, then slowly sat up, rubbing his eyes. The room around them was broken, guards unconscious, lights flickering. Smoke faint in the air. But the child didn't cry. He just looked at the man standing in front of him. Uncle, he mumbled sleepily. Something inside the CEO shifted violently at that word. He had faced assassins. He had buried enemies. He had burned entire organizations to the ground without hesitation. But that small voice calling him uncle, it paused him more than a bullet ever could. He slowly crouched down, something he had not done for anyone in years. The child tilted his head, studying him. Then, as if remembering something important, he held up his small toy car again. Easy you, come for me? Silence. Even the burning building outside felt quieter. The CEO stared at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice no one in his empire had ever heard before, lower controlled, but no longer empty, he answered, yes, just one word. But it changed everything, because for the first time he wasn't answering as a mafia king. He was answering as something far more dangerous. A father who had just realized what he would destroy the world to protect. Behind him, footsteps rushed in, his men securing the floor, reporting cleanup, confirming enemy capture. The war was still happening outside, but inside that room, the battle had already ended. The woman finally reached the doorway, breathless, shaken, eyes scanning the aftermath. She expected rage, chaos, consequences. Instead, she saw something she never imagined. The CEO was holding the child's hand. Not tightly, not possessively. Just enough so he wouldn't feel alone in the broken silence around them. The child leaned slightly closer, trusting him without understanding why, and the Mafia CEO, coldest man in the city, feared by nations hidden in the shadows, didn't move away. He simply said quietly, from now on, no one takes you. Not a threat, a promise. And somewhere far outside the building, the enemies who started this war finally understood one thing too late. They hadn't triggered a weakness in the Mafia CEO. They had awakened something far worse. A man who now had something to lose, the night didn't end when the attack stopped. For the Mafia CEO, that was only the beginning, because in his world, survival wasn't the victory. Retribution was. By dawn, the entire city was already changing without most people realizing it. Quiet transfers. Silent arrests. Sudden accidents involving high-ranking underground figures. Communication lines between rival syndicates went dark one by one, like candles being snuffed out by an invisible hand. Inside the CEO's command room, screens flickered nonstop with updates, but he wasn't even watching them closely. He was standing near the window. Behind him, the child sat on the sofa wrapped in a blanket, still holding his toy car, occasionally pressing its wheels together as if the world outside wasn't collapsing in real time. That contrast, chaos outside, calm inside, was something no one in the building dared comment on. The woman stood near the door exhausted, watching both of them. She had expected punishment by now. Questions, interrogation, cold detachment. Instead, the CEO had done something far more unsettling. He had ignored everything that wasn't related to the child. A subordinate entered carefully, bowing low. All attack routes traced, 3 organizations confirmed, 2 foreign linked, 1 domestic insider. The CEO didn't turn. "McRace them," he said simply. The subordinate hesitated. "All of them?" That was a dangerous question. The CEO finally looked over his shoulder, and the subordinate immediately regretted speaking. "Yes," he answered. No emotion, no anger, just inevitability. The room went silent again, because everyone understood what that meant. Not a counterattack, an erasure. Entire networks that had existed for decades would vanish before the week ended. The woman finally spoke, voice trembling slightly. "You don't even know why they came for him." That made him turn fully. "Sir." His gaze landed on her, not cruel, but sharp enough to cut through excuses. "I know enough," he said. Then, after a pause, "They touched what is mine." The child shifted slightly on the sofa, as if reacting to the tone of his voice. The CEO noticed immediately. His expression changed almost imperceptibly, still cold but controlled now. He walked over and crouched beside the child again, something he had started doing without thinking. "Hungry?" he asked. The child nodded. One of the most feared men in the country pressed a button on his desk. Bring food." Now! No one argued. Minutes later, the room filled with silence again, except for the small sound of the child eating slowly, carefully, like he was still unsure whether this was real. The CEO watched him the entire time, not studying enemies, not calculating strategy, just watching, as if he was learning something no battlefield had ever taught him. The woman noticed it too, and for the first time fear in her chest mixed with something else, confusion. Because this man didn't look like a monster right now. He looked like someone trying badly, unfamiliar, dangerously, to understand how to exist beside a child. Then the system alert chimed again. A private encrypted file had been decrypted from one of the captured attackers. The CEO's eyes narrowed slightly. A project file recovered. The analyst reported, "Bookcase. So it's linked to a woman." The woman in the room stiffened instantly, because she already knew. The CEO's gaze sharpened. Bring it up." A file opened on the screen, and the moment the photo appeared, the room changed. The woman's face went pale, because it was her. Years ago, different identity. Different identity. Different location. Hidden background records that should not have existed anymore. The CEO stepped closer to the screen, slowly, carefully, as if each step was weighing something heavier than bullets. The analyst continued, uneasy. She was previously associated with a defunct research division. Genetic tracking project. They were experimenting with lineage mapping for powerful underground bloodlines. Silence. Then the CEO spoke, dangerously quiet. "Explain." The woman's voice broke before she even tried to fully speak. "I ran." That was all she said at first, but it wasn't enough anymore. Because the truth had started surfacing whether she wanted it or not. "I didn't just meet you by accident," she continued, trembling. "I was assigned to observe, to confirm compatibility." The CEO's eyes darkened, and the child, her breath shook. That was never supposed to happen. The words hit the room like a second explosion. Even the analysts went still. The child, still eating, paused slightly at the change in atmosphere, sensing tension without understanding it. The CEO didn't move, but something inside the room tightened. "So I was part of an experiment," he said slowly. Her silence was answer enough. Then, quieter, "And you kept him anyway." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it, because she couldn't. The CEO turned his gaze toward the child again. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he walked over and gently placed a hand on the child's head. The child looked up at him. "Are you mad?" the child asked softly. That question, small, innocent, broke through something sharp in the air. The CEO's expression didn't soften. But it changed. Not anger, not confusion, something closer to decision. "I know," he said. Then, after a pause, "You are not the mistake." Behind him, alarms flickered again. More enemies were moving. The retaliation phase was escalating into full war. But for the first time, the CEO didn't immediately turn to it. He looked at the woman. "You will tell me everything," he said. A pause. "And then I will decide what remains of your past." Not a threat. A verdict. A verdict? And in that moment, she understood something terrifying. The war outside was nothing compared to what was about to happen inside his empire. Because now, the Mafia CEO wasn't just protecting a child. He was uncovering a truth that tied all of them together, one that could turn love, control, and vengeance into something irreversible. And the child, sitting quietly between them, was no longer just a secret. He was the center of a storm that had finally begun to reveal its origin. The silence after the revelation didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, like the air itself was carrying too many buried truths at once. The CEO stood motionless in front of the screen, the old files still open, the words "a genetic lineage project" blinking faintly like a wound that refused to close. Around him, his empire continued to move, reports, alerts, retaliation, updates, but none of it reached him fully anymore, because for the first time, control wasn't enough. The woman sat across the room, hands clenched tightly together as if holding herself together was the only thing stopping her from collapsing. The child was still there too, quietly finishing his food, unaware that his entire existence had just been reduced to something people had once studied instead of loved. The CEO finally spoke, voice lower than before. "How long?" She hesitated. "Before I left, 2 years before I met you properly." That meant everything he thought was coincidence. Wasn't. Every encounter, every moment she appeared in his path, every a chance meeting. Engineered. The realization didn't make him angry immediately. It made him still. Dangerously still. Then slowly he turned toward her. "You were sent to observe me," he said. Not a question. A statement. She nodded once, barely. "And the child?" Her voice cracked. "He wasn't supposed to survive outside controlled conditions." That sentence changed something in the room. Even the analysts behind the glass screen stopped typing. Because controlled conditions in his world never meant anything humane. The CEO's jaw tightened for the first time in a way that wasn't controlled anger. It was something deeper trying to break through. "Oh, you let them experiment on him?" he said quietly. "I ran," she whispered. "I chose him over everything. I disappeared. I hid him." A pause. "And I was afraid if I told you, you would think he was just a product of them." The CEO didn't answer immediately. His eyes shifted toward the child again. The boy had finished eating and was now gently pushing his toy car across the armrest of the sofa, making quiet engine sounds with his mouth, completely unaware of the world splitting apart around him. Something in that simple sound hit harder than any battlefield memory. The CEO moved, not sharply. Not like a ruler, like someone stepping into unfamiliar territory. He sat down on the edge of the sofa beside the child. The child looked up immediately, curious. "Curious," the boy said, as if surprised by something simple. Then very slowly he asked, "Where would I go?" The child blinked, as if that answer was obvious. Home? That word hit differently. The CEO's expression didn't change outwardly, but something inside him cracked quietly, like ice finally breaking under weight. It had carried too long. He had no answer for that word, because he didn't have a home. Not until now. The child shifted closer without hesitation, as if drawn by instinct rather than logic. Then, in a small voice, "Are you my dad?" The room froze. Even the woman stopped breathing. The CEO didn't answer right away. For once, there was no calculated response, no strategic delay, no controlled mask. Just silence. Then slowly he lifted his hand and placed it gently on the child's head. "Yes," he said. One word. No conditions, no analysis, no denial. The child smiled slightly, like that was all he needed. And then, without fear, without hesitation, he leaned into him. That simple contact did what years of war never could. It didn't soften him. It reconnected something that had been severed for a long time. The CEO's hand stayed on the child's head longer than necessary, longer than safe, longer than logical. Behind them, the woman's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back anymore, because she wasn't just watching a confession anymore. She was watching something fragile being formed inside a man who was never supposed to have it. A bond, and bonds in his world were weaknesses. But he didn't let go. Instead, he pulled the child slightly closer, careful, controlled, as if learning how to hold something precious without breaking it. The child adjusted easily, resting his head against him. "Warm," the boy murmured sleepily. The CEO didn't respond, but his eyes lowered slightly. For the first time in his life, he didn't think about enemies. He didn't think about revenge. He didn't think about control. He thought only one thing. No one touches this child again. Not the world. Not the past. Not even the system that created him. Outside, the empire was still burning with retaliation orders, collapse reports, and silent wars unfolding in the shadows. But inside that room, something entirely different was happening. Not destruction, not dominance. Something far more dangerous than either. A beginning. For the first time, the Mafia CEO didn't feel like a man standing above the world. He felt like a father sitting inside it, quietly holding on to something he would no longer allow to disappear. The calm didn't last. It never did in his world. For 3 days, the CEO's empire moved like a living weapon. Every rival network connected to the genetic project was being dismantled piece by piece. Financial systems collapsing, leaders disappearing, entire underground routes wiped clean without public trace. But inside the penthouse level, the atmosphere was different. The child stayed close to him now, too close, almost instinctively, as if his body already recognized where safety existed before his mind could understand it. The CEO didn't correct it, didn't push him away. Ale didn't push him away. He was still learning this strange new language of presence. The woman, however, was no longer just a secret holder. She was a key, and keys always opened doors that someone wanted kept shut. It happened late at night when a hidden drive finally finished decrypting. The analyst hesitated before speaking. "Sir, there's a full archive. It's her original identity file." The CEO's eyes lifted. "Show me." The screen changed, and everything shifted again. Her past wasn't just involvement. She was born inside the project, not recruited, not accidentally discovered. Designed to be part of it, a controlled lineage candidate raised under observation since childhood, a human variable meant to test compatibility with high-tier underground bloodlines, his bloodline included. But something had gone wrong. At some point, she stopped cooperating. She escaped. When she escaped, she didn't just run from the system. She took something with her. The child. A deeper file opened, and the room went still. The CEO stared at the data without blinking. The genetic experiment wasn't just observation, it was continuation planning. They weren't just tracking compatibility, they were preparing heirs. The child was not a random outcome. He was targeted continuity, a living proof that their system could bind chaos and power into a controllable future. The CEO's voice came out lower than before. "So they don't want him dead." A pause. "They want him back." No one answered. Ha! Because that was worse than death. The woman finally spoke, shaking. "I didn't know everything. I swear I didn't. When I ran, I thought I broke it." The CEO didn't look at her immediately. He looked at the child instead. The boy was sitting on the floor, stacking small blocks quietly, humming to himself, unaware that his entire existence had been studied like a blueprint. Then, the building's entire system flickered. Once, then again. Emergency override alert. External breach detected. Every screen in the room turned red at once. The CEO's expression changed instantly. Not surprise, recognition. "Other here," he said. And this time, his voice wasn't calm, it was absolute. The walls of the penthouse corridor exploded inward seconds later. Not random attackers, not mercenaries. This was extraction-level force. Black tactical units moved through smoke and shattered glass like ghosts. Their objective wasn't to fight, it was to retrieve. One of them spoke into comms immediately. A target confirmed. Secondary objective, child acquisition. The CEO heard every word. And something inside him stopped being controlled. For the first time since the Empire began, he didn't give an order, he moved. The first attacker reached the doorway and never made it inside. The CEO's hand struck first, precise and devastating. No wasted motion, no warning. Every movement was calculated but fueled by something far less rational than strategy. Behind him, the woman grabbed the child instantly, pulling him behind the reinforced desk. "Stay low," she shouted. But the child wasn't crying. He was watching him. The CEO noticed that mid-fight, and for a split second, everything around him blurred. Because the child wasn't afraid. He was trusting. That single realization changed the rhythm of everything. The CEO's movements sharpened further, more efficient, more absolute. The attackers tried to push forward, but the building itself became an extension of his will. Doors locked remotely, escape routes sealed, reinforcements cut off. And then the CEO spoke into his internal network. A no containment, a pause, then colder, erase the entry unit. That was the moment his empire stopped being defensive and became a weapon without restraint. The attackers realized, too late, that this wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a massacre. One of them tried to retreat, but the exits were already gone. Another shouted into calms, panic rising. "He's not defending. He's eliminating everything." Inside the room, the woman held the child tightly as explosions echoed down the hallway. The child looked up at her quietly. "Is Dad okay?" he asked. Her breath caught. Because even in chaos, his first concern wasn't fear. It was him. And at that exact moment, the CEO finished the last breach in the corridor. The final attacker fell back. Silence followed. Not peace. Control. He stepped back into the room slowly, blood on his sleeve. Expression unchanged, but his eyes locked immediately onto the child. The child lifted his arms slightly, not scared, just reaching. That simple gesture broke the last restraint inside him. The CEO walked over and picked him up without hesitation. This time, there was no distance, no uncertainty. The woman watched him carefully. "What happens now?" she whispered. The CEO didn't look at her immediately. He adjusted the child in his arms slightly, making sure he was comfortable. Then he answered. A pause. His eyes darkened, not with rage, but with finality. "I end whoever thinks they can take him again. Not revenge anymore. Not retaliation. Protection that had crossed into something irreversible." Outside the shattered building, the city's underground networks began to collapse in real time as his final orders were executed. But inside that room, the child leaned against him quietly, safe, unaware that the world had just been rewritten around his existence. And for the first time in his life, the Mafia CEO didn't feel like he was chasing control. He felt like he had already claimed something the world could never take back again. A son. And a war that would now continue until nothing remained of those who tried to undo it. The war didn't end with noise. It ended with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that follows something so absolute that no one dares to speak first. Within days, every organization tied to the experiment collapsed. Some vanished overnight. Some surrendered without being asked. Others simply stopped existing in records as if they had never been part of the world at all. The Mafia CEO didn't announce victory. He didn't need to. Because everyone already understood whatever he had protected was no longer negotiable. Inside the penthouse, life became strangely quiet. The woman no longer felt like a prisoner. Not exactly free either, but something in between, as if she was being kept alive inside a decision she no longer controlled. The child had stopped asking questions about explosions. He started asking smaller things. "Are you busy? Or will you come back? Can I sit here?" And every time the CEO answered, not like a ruler, like someone learning how to stay present in a life that now depended on him. One evening, the city lights spilled through the glass walls. The empire outside was still burning in fragments. Cleanup operations, power shifts, silent restructuring. But inside, the child was asleep on the sofa. This time, not alone. The CEO sat beside him, one hand resting lightly on his back. The woman stood near the window, watching them. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "If I had never run, none of this would have happened." He didn't look up immediately. When he did, his voice was calm, and he wouldn't exist. That made her freeze. He continued, eyes returning to the sleeping child. "And I would still be empty." A silence followed, heavier than all the wars combined. The woman slowly lowered her gaze. "I don't know if I deserve to stay near him," she whispered. The CEO didn't answer right away, because for once he wasn't calculating punishment or consequence. He was simply deciding what kind of world he wanted left after everything. Finally, he spoke. A stay, a pause. "Ah, not for me." His eyes softened just slightly as they landed on the child. For him, the woman's breath trembled, but she didn't argue, because this wasn't forgiveness. And it wasn't justice, it was something far more human than both. Time passed. The empire stabilized, rebuilt under a different kind of rule, quieter, colder, more controlled. Fewer enemies dared approach. Fewer shadows remained. But inside the CEO's life, something had changed permanently. He no longer ruled from distance. He returned home every day, without fail. And every day a small voice greeted him the same way, a dad. One evening, as the child ran toward him again, the CEO finally crouched down properly and caught him before he fell. For a moment, he just held him. Not as a mafia king, not as a strategist, not as a weapon of power, just a father. The child looked up and smiled. The CEO didn't smile back widely, but his hand tightened slightly around him. Careful, protective, real, and that was enough. Because some endings aren't explosions. Some endings are simply a choice to stop becoming what the world made you and start becoming what someone quietly calls you instead, a father. And for the first time in his life, he didn't let go.